So one of our pitfalls related to septic shock is our reassessment documentation. So now septic shock can be diagnosed just via documentation by an MD, or if they meet the criteria of severe sepsis plus an elevated lactic acid of 4 or more, or refractory hypotension after a fluid bolus of 30 mLs per kilo has been given. So once a patient is diagnosed with septic shock or they meet criteria, what is the next step to be done?
Sure. So the difficult thing with this metric isn't so much the treatment. Our patients are being treated, they're receiving the fluids, being placed on pressors if they need it. The issue is just the documentation. So really what we need to remember is that if we are diagnosing a patient with septic shock, if we're saying that they're in shock from sepsis, that we're doing a reassessment after they receive the fluids. And that reassessment shows that the patient is either responding to the fluids or needs a further intervention, whether that's vasopressors or whether that's further fluids. If we are giving further fluids, then we have to do another reassessment afterwards. But that's going to be the biggest thing. It's just remembering if we are diagnosing somebody with septic shock, that we are doing a reassessment after the fluids have been finished. The other thing with septic shock is making sure that if, let's say, somebody has an elevated lactic acid or they're hypotensive, but it's not because of sepsis, that we make sure, again, to document that and say that this is not sepsis, this is related to cardiogenic shock, this is related to hypovolemic shock, or this is related to hemorrhagic shock. That way, if they are admitted later down, it doesn't get inappropriately placed on septic shock. And so it comes back down to documentation and saying, at this time, patient does not have septic shock, they have hypotension because of this reason, or they were placed on vasopressors because of this reason. And that helps us because later, if they do call it septic shock, you probably didn't document a sepsis reassessment, you didn't document any of that, they probably didn't receive all the bundle for the sepsis. So it really helps us out in those situations, and it shows that we are appropriately taking care of those patients.